In this video, we'll continue talking about the work energy theorem, and just recall that the work energy theorem states that the net work done on an object is equal to the change in that object's kinetic energy. So let's just think about the kind of two different situations. So if positive net work is done, it means that energy was transferred. Which means that, so if net work is positive up here, it means that the change in kinetic energy is positive. But that really means that the final kinetic energy is greater than the initial kinetic energy. That's how you would get a positive change in kinetic energy, which means that the velocity, it's assuming that the mass stays the same, the velocity increases if the net work done in an object is positive. And that should make sense. And it should also say that the more positive work done in an object, the more its velocity will increase, right? So the more energy I transfer to it, the more kinetic energy it'll have, the greater the change in kinetic energy, which means that the more velocity it'll have, the increase in velocity. Then the opposite is true if we have negative work. So if negative net work is done, energy was lost, which means that the change in kinetic energy, again from up here, if this is negative, then this must be negative, is negative. That means that the final kinetic energy is less than the initial kinetic energy, which means that the velocity decreased. And the same logic holds as the previous one. The more negative work that is done, the more energy is lost, the more that your kinetic energy will change, and the bigger the difference between the initial and the final, which means that the more your velocity decreases. And let's just really just go over real quick again what negative net work would mean in terms of the energy. If positive work is done, it means that energy is transferred to you. If negative work is done, it means that energy is not transferred to you. In fact, you are transferring energy to something else. And that makes sense if we're thinking about negative work being done on an object, making it slow down. Well, where did that kinetic energy go that it had? Well, it must have given it away. It must have done work on something, right? So instead of work being done on it, it did work on something else. And again, if we think about the conservation of energy, right, it can't just lose kinetic energy, it had to give it away. So if there's negative net work done, we can assume that that kinetic energy was transferred to something else. It's also worth saying that if no net work is done on an object, then there's no change in kinetic energy. And that should also make sense, right? So if no net energy is transferred to something, then its kinetic energy shouldn't change at all. So let's just look at kinetic energy in another way real quick with the work energy theorem. So another way of saying this is that the kinetic energy of an object is equal to the amount of work that that object can do before coming to rest. And you'll see that this is just rephrasing kind of the other things that we've been saying. So this is just kind of coming from the opposite view, which is, well, instead of saying, well, doing net work will change its kinetic energy, we can say that, well, the kinetic energy that it has, right, if we are to totally cancel it out, right, that means that all of that energy has to be transferred to work, right? All of that energy is going into work, it means it's being transferred away. So it'll be the amount of work it can do before it stops.